This is the first thing and one of the most important things I'm going to say. Yes, I do stalk Bruce Hoffman. And if you don't stalk smart people, you're stupid. Because, I mean, if you're not stalking the smart ones, what the hell are you doing, right? This is what he wrote to me yesterday. I have to thank you. This was so, I'm reading it because there's no pictures and there's some fire guys in the house. I have to thank you. This was so much fun, and I learned so much from you and the students and alums. They are amazing people who have accomplished so much and done so much good. It is so refreshing to meet great Americans like them. Hey, he doesn't pass out false platitudes. It's just not Bruce. He'll just shut his mouth and look at you like you're a moron. He only says these things when he actually feels it, and clearly he did. I was super happy to get this because this is my family here, and there you go. Sorry. Hey, make sure you read what the hat says. It doesn't say what you thought it said just because it's red and white. Military folks, they like their bottom line up front. I'm going to give you the bottom line up front. This is a wicked problem. What's this silly Welsh thing? Canadian framework. You know, it's not simple. It's not complicated. It's freaking painful, right? It's all interactive. And it's not just one thing. It's overlapping. And it's got a whole bunch, a lot like these Russian dolls inside of each other that cause greater problems. I want to point out some polarization points. I'm going to point out some militia problems. We're going to go blowing through the militia problems because this group ought to already understand an awful lot of that. I'm making some assumptions. And then I'm going to say just how screwed we are, because I believe we're involved in a narrative war, and that does not advantage government in that narrative warfare. And then stand by, y'all got some great fun coming after November. I'm sure you're going to love it. I'm going to just tell you, there is no primary threat anymore. Where does the primary threat come from? Who the hell knows, right? Because it can come from absolutely anywhere. Certainly all of the places that are on here, but when you start mixing ideologies, as the folks down in Atlanta are seeing, when you mix environmentalism and social justice and anti-fascist types, when you mix those together, they can be more problematic than any of them are on their own. And then every one of you are going to have problems with protest over the next year. The next 12 months, you're going to have a problem with protest. And the seams there are very violent, or potentially very violent. What a moron. I mean, these people, it's just unbelievable how they were hamming it up for the camera. But if you had an absolute understanding of the threat after this took place, because you went, oh my God, we have got to get smart on the threat, because look at what can happen. You do not have an understanding of the threat today. You may have a piece of it. But even if you really understood it a year ago, it has evolved so quickly. I sat next to John Gordon last night. This is a smart dude. And he was talking about the threat. And it is so involved and interrelated in ways that 3 years ago, it was not interrelated. These were separate buckets. Where we are now is very different. And I want to say that bureaucratic postures are set up for grant crack. They are not set up to respond to threat necessarily. And we need to think about that. We need to respond to the threat, not just to the grant crack, although I do love grant crack. Here's some of the big general buckets, but it's all interactive. So we got the international terrorists, we got the domestic terrorists. Explain to me how those are completely different anymore, because Al Gore invented this thing called the internet, and now they're all interrelated, okay, in a way that that you couldn't have imagined 20 years ago when we came up with this domestic international kind of buckets. We have a polarized society. If you should come to my house for a barbecue, I will tell you that the people that show up there hate each other so much, and that's because they're related, right? And they can't get away from each other. But we hate each other, and that's problematic because there are people who are looking to exacerbate that hatred that we have for each other. And then those people are oftentimes a group of states that are problematic for us. These are interesting little symbols. You got the facing book and Twitter or whatever, tweeter. That's Instagram, right? Yeah, on the right. These are really problematic, and they are accelerating problems in these 5 categories as far as I see. And I'm not convinced that America cares about democracy anymore. Some portion of America only cares about democracy in relation to whether or not it represents their political view. And beyond that, everybody can fall off the end of the pier. I don't really care about it. That's scary as hell to me. The rule of law seems to be a question for the ages right now as to whether or not that's something that we care about. If we are a nation of laws, it also leads to an ordered society. Those two go together in some way. And where we are and what we do through this polarization that occurs online, they seem synergistic to me. Truth decay. Some of you may have read The Social Construction of Reality. Has anybody in here read that? I love you. It suggests that your reality is socially constructed. That does not mean that there are not objective facts, right? That does not mean that if I drop this clicker dicker thing off of here, that it won't spread into 1,000 pieces, right? Because there's still gravity, whether I socially believe it's going to rise instead of fall to the ground. If you haven't read Truth Decay by Rand, you need to get on that. And it's a big book, so you better pack lunch. And then the loss of trust in our institutions is killing us. And it relates back to this, lack of ordered society and the lack of respect for the rule of law and the failure of democracy in relationship, but this polarization issue. Anybody know what the one institution is that we have greater respect for now? It's the military, okay? Which I think is a great thing. It can also be problematic. That can be an issue if going forward there are people who are putting their own ideals ahead of the country. Some of you heard me whine about hybrid warfare before, and Seth Jones. I'm gonna mention books. Those are those things that you open like this and then you read the little words on them. I'm going to argue that you need to kill your TV and read because the country needs you. They don't need you to watch, I don't know what's on television, whatever it is. They need you to read, because that's how critical thinking takes place. But read Seth Jones' 3 Dangerous Men. It's valuable, and it's still important, and it's 2 books back for him. This guy writes more books. And anyway, hybrid threats combine military and non-military, as well as covert and overt means, including disinformation, cyber attacks, economic pressures, deployment of irregular armed groups, and the use of regular forces. Hybrid methods are used to blur the lines between war and peace and attempt to sow doubt in the minds of target populations. I wonder where they could find a target population which might be receptive to doubts about their government. I don't know where, but I'm just going to suggest it's probably in the United States of America. This misinformation and bias is key to hybrid warfare. And bias is like an Olympic sport at this point. It's almost required of all of us. It builds off this existing polarization, and it baffles my father-in-law, who goes, it can't really matter, because the only things that really matter are when the Marines land on Iwo Jima or something, right? Because that's how conflict takes place. Well, that's cute, but that's not the way we do it anymore. This is where warfare is taking place. It's in the information space. And it's in the information space that you're having to deal with, that your department or agency is trying to negotiate and navigate. And that your husband, wife, children, or whatever loved ones are also operating in. Your loved ones are involved in active warfare. Get that in your head. Your loved ones are involved daily in active warfare. They're targeting your personnel. They're targeting you. They're targeting your institution, but they're targeting the next generation as well. They're already sowing the seeds of distrust and hatred of the other, and they're being effective. That's an ugly picture of Gerasimov. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm supposed to hit that again, I think. It's a face only a mother could love. He says this: the very rules of war have changed. The role of non-military means of achieving political and strategic goals have grown. And in many cases, they have exceeded the power of force of weapons in their effectiveness. He wasn't joking, right? He's not just trying to come up with a new way forward as the chief there. What he's found is a strategy that he can use full-time, 24/7. It's not something that I have to deploy. It's something that is being continuously deployed against every area of the foreign government that he wants to impact. And it's not just us, by the way. I have this friend, Anders Strindberg. He lives in some pointless country. I think it's called Sweden. And he says they are under constant attack by these people, constant bombardment, trying to disrupt their society and undermine the institutions that the society is relying on for their own protection. These two colonels, common spelling, and I'm going to let you explain how to say their name. They've been at it a lot longer than Russia has. Okay, this book comes out in '99. It doesn't actually get translated to English until 2015. I was a little rusty on my Chinese, so I just had to wait until it came out. Have you all read this book? Go home and read this book, okay? Go home and read this book, because this book is something that they've been doing since 2000, right? They've been at this 25 years. They've been at this 25 years. Think about that. It's a generational jumpstart on where we are. That's freaking irritating to me. I hate when anybody gets ahead of us. We need to trip them. get ahead of them. But it really fits with their cultural understanding of what they're trying to do. Sun Tzu says this: supreme excellence consists of breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting. Well, you know, if you go to LAX or Dulles to the airport, you go to the bookstore, they got the Sun Tzu Bible for working out and the Sun Tzu business guide and the, I don't know, Sun Tzu motorcycle repair. All that, you know, that's cute, and some publisher is making a boatload of cash off of it, so good on them. But what he has to talk about in relation to ongoing conflict is frightening if you start to take it seriously, rather than seeing it as a historical document, but as a philosophy of how to approach conflict in an ongoing manner, and that has to be woven into the very fabric of who you are as a society. That should be that should be a little scary to us. Why? Because we're a democratic society. That's not our approach, hopefully. That shouldn't be our approach, because what kinds of mitigation and response can you make to First Amendment protected activity? Because that First Amendment protected activity is super important to it being a free and democratic society. And if you're trying to subvert somebody without ever actually having an overt conflict with them, that's problematic too. So the very philosophy that underpins what the two colonels have come up with is challenging to us if we want to live in a free society, an ordered society, a society of laws. And I do. I think that's like the bee's knees. I think that's a cool thing. We take these actions and we assume that the Republican Guard looks like that thing on the left. Goofy, you know, high step marching and stuff. But that's not what they look like. 3 years ago, Bruce Hoffman was attacked by the Iranian Republican Guard, right? They didn't shoot at him, but they worked their way into his network through the Council on Foreign Relations and started putting out information about Bruce using the internet, right? And they traced it back to the IRGC. That's terrifying, because what you have there is a nation state targeting an individual because he's doing analysis of a component of the nation state. That suggests that if you get to be very effective at your analytical position, you may get targeted by somebody who would like to take you down. Kind of. And just to be clear, I don't want I'm not really good at ambiguity. I am arguing that you are on the front lines of modern warfare, and that your family is on the front lines of modern warfare, and that you don't get out of that by not joining the military. You just have a little less protection while you're doing it. So, welcome. There are 6 things that these 3 states in particular really work hard to target us with, and that's these multiple instruments. It's not a thing, it's multiple instruments. It's synchronized. You know, on Tuesday, Bruce brought up the fact that synchronized attack by Hamas, and we're going to talk a little bit more about Hamas. The synchronization that was displayed was in fact a major part of the problem. Well, these attacks are just as well synchronized across different sectors and not just government. And they value creativity. They don't look down on millennials. And we got to knock that crap off too, by the way. Millennials are going to save us. We need to get over it. And what's the one after that? Generation X? Is it? Z. Same thing. It's near the end of the alphabet. We need that creativity, and we need to reward that creativity. Why? Because those are the folks that are going to save us. Because people like me, we don't think that way. I think in an analog way. We need people who do not think in that analog way and that are willing to come up with creative responses to these. Russia has certainly paid money for creative ways to undermine us. China, the same thing. Yeah, they're tailored. You know, this is a great big old country. They're not targeting the U.S. They're targeting very specific regions within the U.S., and they're tailoring those attacks to what will work in that region. They're integrated across the whole of government and the whole of industry, right? Not just the government. And they're opportunistic. Gee, I don't know, like COVID. Let's take advantage of everybody being locked in their house. I wonder if we can convince them to hate the government even more than they already do. So, you know, what do? First thing we do is we realize that the purpose is not to vanquish us. In the same way that Hamas did not think they were going to push Israel into the sea, but they were going to do something different, and we're going to talk about that. We need to get beyond the idea that somebody is going to sign a treaty on the deck of some battleship. That's not going to happen anymore. We are going to be at war for the rest of our lives. We are going to be at war for the rest of our lives. That war looks different than World War II, but we are in a conflict with people who wish us ill. And we can't wish it away. And I would like to wish it away, but we can't. Yeah. How many of y'all have seen these movies? They're freaking amazing. I see one hand back there. These are the two most successful movies ever in the world. Guess what? They didn't come out of Hollywood. The Chinese made them. And who's the bad guy? We're the bad guy. Who's the good guys in this thing? The media has a huge impact on discursive frames. And they've been very effective using this type of film. And it doesn't just play in China. It plays to the global South, who might be a little frustrated with the U.S. narrative. I don't think we're organized for the fight we're in. It happens in your domestic jurisdiction, and it happens to your personnel, and it happens every day, and it's integrated in a way that I hope we're doing, but I don't believe we're doing it as underhandedly to their populations. Maybe we are. Maybe I'm just in the dark. We're in a constant state of conflict, and we're not getting out of this thing alive. We are going to stay in this constant state of conflict, and we need to be organized to recognize that. And that's way beyond mine. Somebody can take that on as a thesis. But we've got to get organized in a way to respond to this hybrid threat that also takes into account these other threats we're going to talk about. Oh yeah, if you hadn't read this, Like War, get on Amazon. Hey, so we're going to blow through these really quickly because a bunch of them are the usual suspects, and you probably already know an awful lot about them. But we need to be reminded of what they are. Q is coming to your dinner table. I like to barbecue. You didn't know that. We were having a barbecue, and old family friends showed up, and Sherry is her name, Sherry Bergamo, and she was wearing a Q bracelet. This is a lady with 2 master's degrees, an extremely successful medical career. And, you know, being shy, I was like, Sherry, how can you believe that bullshit? And did I say that a lot? I'm sorry. How can you believe that bull? And she's like, well, you know, I don't believe the lizard people stuff. But you know this is true over here, right? And that's a problem. That's a problem because they get to determine what is the socially constructed reality they want to adopt into their lives. Here's a really good dude. He goes from Yale to jail. This is the guy who comes up with Oath Keepers. They've been around a while now, folks, like 15 years. He's cooling his heels in jail right now. But the common thought is as soon as Trump is our president again, he'll probably quietly be pardoned. So maybe this is just a temporary duty station for him. These folks, same thing, 3%ers. I love I'm very patriotic. So, you know, they're a proud fellowship of proud Americans who wish to preserve the core tenets of the Constitution and our American way of life. That sounds good to me. And they are targeting military and law enforcement and fire and emergency managers and hospital workers. And why would they do that? Why? Because it gives them legitimacy, people. This is an Orange County sheriff's deputy duty vest. Was taken at a protest, and he's got his 3%er badge on his duty vest. That might be challenging for us. This is a fine rogues gallery. They got from 10 to 22 years for these 5 leaders. And what happened? There's been a surge in recruitment for the Proud Boys after the riot. There's been a surge in recruitment. And guess what? They changed their tactics. They're learning from what they did wrong. And the Boog, I love the Boog because, well, they got Hawaiian shirts. Who doesn't love that? There was really a left and right and libertarian kind of internal struggle going on within there. That's kind of over at this point. There are those groups within the Boog that are focused on Civil War, and others, like the Virginia Boogaloo, is really focused on Second Amendment stuff. But they are, they're more than meme warriors. A lot of these people have started organizing offline, in person, because they were getting hammered, right? They were law enforcement was getting into them. And they're serious. They want a civil war. Now, the assumption is that straight, white males are going to end up on top at the end of that civil war. Their assumption. I wonder if they could actually make a civil war happen. Nah, they wouldn't do that. These accelerationists are the same way, right? And we've been looking at folks implementing the accelerationist model for a long time. This is not something new. I believe that Fortnier and Nichols and McVeigh, we always forget about these other 2 yahoos, one of which is out of prison, right? Michael Fortner, he's out of prison because he testified for the state. But that was an attempt to accelerate us towards a civil war where they would become dominant again. We don't tend to think of that attack in that way. But all of these do. Look at this yahoo. He looks like Clark Kent, right? This could be the guy that lives right next door to you. And he's busy trying to kill Jews here in Poway. And they have a intellectual foundation from their perspective. This is Camus, he's a French writer, who says this: we shall not leave Europe, we shall make Africa leave Europe. Okay, and accelerationists have flock to his material for an intellectual base on what to base their philosophy on. There's been takeovers from both the left and the right. It isn't just one or the other, and all of them have used guns. And by the way, there is a danger from the left as well. The right, it is not equal at this point. It's about a 90-10 split. You're much more likely to get targeted by a right-wing extremist than a left-wing extremist at this time. But that's not been the history of extremism in this country. Predominantly, it's come from the left. And we tend to forget that. For God's sakes, if we could just walk and chew gum at the same time, right? We don't need to forget about everything that we've learned in the past just to focus on something new. This is Professor Bray, and he says a couple of interesting things. He wrote this book on Antifa. He is a member of Antifa. He says fascism cannot be defeated through speech. If you read the book, you find out that it's going to take some violence. I'm sorry, but it's just going to take some violence. And I was listening to a lady at the Link conference this last year in Vegas. And she had been a member of Antifa. And she said, you know, the Bureau may not be able to come out and say they were terrorists, but we believed that we were doing terrorism. That's what we were trying to do, was use violence, this very specific action, to make a political change. We thought that was terrorism. And then this intersectional violence, it seems to take place at protest sites. Here's an Antifa guy about to whack a right-wing guy from Patriot Prayer. This intersection between legitimate protest, we're going to find more seams of violence as we go forward over the next 6 months. These people have the best name in any militia. So they're not fucking around coalition. And they have come out at hundreds at a time with weapons. Right now, Grandmaster Jay, he's cooling his heels in a Louisville jail, waiting, kind of pointed his rifle at some FBI agents, and they thought that was a bad idea. But this is a significant group of people that have shown up a number of times with hundreds of folks. I will tell you, they've shot themselves twice. So, you know, why should the Oath Keepers, you know that, what's his lips, Stuart, from the Oath Keepers, the reason he wears that patch is he shot himself in the eye with a gun, right? He's a genius. This is a problem, folks, and I want to spend about an hour and a half on this, but we can't. Christian nationalism is stealing the spiritual juice of evangelicals. Why? Because it gives them access to a huge voting bloc. And I'm going to have some literature for you on this as well. You cannot talk about the threat at this point without including the classic terrorism studies escalation case study, which is Hamas. Okay? This is all about patron-client relationships, and they're coming to your area of responsibility, so it'll be fun. I do want to tell you that I'm going to talk about this, and I don't want to change your mind. I'm not here to change your political mind. I'm not here to change your ideological perspective, certainly not your religious. I am about analysis and not justification. That said, sometimes analysis pisses off both sides. And so I will be doing that. I don't believe there's an answer to this. Not an answer. I believe there are many answers, and that they form a tapestry, and that we keep ripping the tapestry apart. What we saw going on here is super important to us, because the dynamics that took place there are taking place today in your jurisdiction. Those dynamics are taking place right now in your jurisdiction. Yeah. And I think that everyone in this room owes it to their decision maker. And if you're the decision maker, you also have to give advice to the person above you. But we owe it to those people to not get caught up in the emotionality. Because it's very easy to just get emotional and pissed. And analytically, that does not help us. And we have difficult decisions to make in relation to this. And you need good analytical frameworks with good juice at the end of that squeeze to give the decision maker going forward. So here are 6 terrorism studies truisms that come out of this attack. The goal of terrorism is not to kill people. The goal of terrorism is to communicate a political message. The goal of terrorism is to communicate a political message. It's so easy to get off of that, right? Get sidetracked by the Islamic State sawing somebody's head off, or the rape of women here in Israel, or whatever it is. There's no good terrorist action, right? You get focused on that. That is about grabbing your attention. That is not about the total of terrorism. It's about the communication of that political message. And we tend to forget that leaders and followers, even in your own organizations, have a different focus. And that can be true with Hamas as well, or true with Al-Qaeda, or true with whoever it might be that you're having to run up against, the Proud Boys. It doesn't work unless you get a perceived overreaction. Now, what's an overreaction? I'm all for killing everybody. So is that an overreaction? Yes. If the communities that are impacted perceive that it is an overreaction, then that's going to be a problem for you. It can't just be internal to your community. It's going to be evaluated in a broader sense. If it's perceived to be an overreaction, you're going to have to withstand the narratives that are going to come out of that. And you're going to find that the narrative will have just as much impact as the violence does, perhaps more. And it goes back to this. With Hamas and Israel, they talked about mowing the grass. They had them in a cage, essentially. And the violence is there to get your attention to the political message. And Jenkins said, in the 70s, he said, terrorists want a lot of people watching, not a lot of people dead. But you got to escalate if you're not getting a lot of people watching with the level of violence that you're using. And if you're no longer able to exert that violence on your target audience, that's a problem. That leads to escalation. Bruce has been telling me this for, 28 and a half years now. Terrorism is dynamic, amorphous, and evolving. And he was right to beat me up with this, because it's the one thing that you have to recognize all the time in your jurisdiction. If you were effective last year at defeating the domestic terrorist threat, that does not mean that you have the secret sauce. That means that they're going to escalate the violence. And now you have to find a new way to be effective. And there are perceptions of relative deprivation. And that does not mean that the people are necessarily deprived. That means that they perceive themselves to be deprived, and that is going to lead them to a socially constructed idea about what that group has to do to change that situation. Relative deprivation is taking place in in groups in your jurisdiction today. It doesn't just happen in Israel and Gaza. 3 big things come together to really create a perfect storm with this attack in October. This idea of mowing the grass, technologically, militarily, and from an intelligence perspective, Israel has it all going on in relation to both the sub-state actors and their neighbors. And the perception was, and I do say was that that was true for their neighbors. We saw that some of the technological advantages that they had were defeated through very primitive means. That's a problem for us because we do the same thing, right? We count on our comm advantage over them as well. The political context really had a big impact. The Palestinians could not have Saudi Arabia normalizing relations with Israel. Okay, everybody's equal in the Middle East, only Saudis are a little more equal. And they could not have that going down, or that would have been, the whole boat right there. And then this learning organizations and leadership, it doesn't just matter for these terrorists, it really matters for you as well. And I'm hoping to make that point. These groups are learning organizations. They're ruthless jerks, but they're learning organizations, and there is a heavy penalty for early withdrawal. If they make a mistake, they get dead, right? If they make a mistake, they get dead without their action being successful. So that incentivizes them to be more effective. I've always wanted to know why we don't have lots of cyber terrorism. Well, it's because they know how guns and bombs work. It's guns and bombs and then guns and guns and bombs that they keep coming back to. Why? They're successful with it. And it shows up really well on the 6 o'clock news. But these organizations took what was happening before. They were no longer being effective at communicating that political message, and they became learning organizations, and they came up with a different way of using guns and bombs to catch our attention. This is not me trying to do my imitation of True Lies, the grainy picture of terrorists with a naked light bulb type of thing. There's only 3 pictures of this guy. And this is the one I chose to use because it was the best one I could get. This is Aldif. He's the guest. He's been staying in a different house for years before the October attack. Israel's been trying to kill him. They did kill his wife, and they killed 2 kids. They also got close enough that he's missing an arm and a leg and 1 eye, and they call him lucky, right? But he is desperate to have an impact on Israel. He's desperate to have an impact on Israel. And if you'll look, he's somewhere between 58 and 60. I'm sure the IDF can tell you exactly, but he's somewhere between 58 and 60. He wants something done before he dies. 60 is really, it's not old, and I don't want to hear you snickering, but if you're over 60 and you're living in Gaza and you happen to be a Hamas leader, you're an old man, okay? You're on your way to death, and it's coming soon to a theater near you. And he really wanted to get something done before he died. He's an engineer. He's worked hard to develop weapons, and he's worked hard to deploy those weapons. Leadership still matters in your organization. Leadership matters in these organizations. Leadership for Hamas prior to 2017, they got soft. They were sucking up a lot of money from Qatar, okay? and they were enjoying it. Nothing like good wine and lots of food. These folks were on the ground. Leadership on the ground is a bit different than leadership in diaspora. And this dude is the guy that Benjamin Netanyahu on October 7th said, he is a dead man walking. He was in the joint in Israel, and when they took, what's his name? Sergeant Gilead Shalion, is that about right? This sergeant. They traded over 1,000 people for this IDF sergeant. He was one of them. He'd already been in the joint for 22 years. For doing what? Well, he killed some Israelis, but he also killed some Palestinians that he found out were snitches. And snitches get stitches. And he went to prison, they released him, and he went right back to work. And now he'd been studying strategy the whole time. And now he had been learning Hebrew fluently. We know this because some of the hostages were addressed by him in the tunnels 3 days after the event, and he spoke to them in fluent Hebrew. And he's 61, and he wants to get something done, and he hates Israel, right? He wants to actually accomplish something. Leadership matters for them and us. And this is a problem. This is a picture of Charlottesville, but the same thing is going on in an organization near you. The same thing is going on. Somebody is frustrated with their accelerationist inability to make things change. And like McVeigh, they're willing to go whole hog and go all in. And we don't know who that is. It isn't Richard Spencer this time, okay? It's not the one we have identified. It's the one we don't have identified that's still on the internet in his mother's basement and planning that next big thing. Or maybe they're 10 rows in to this march and we just don't know because they're, 18-year-old kid that is just young and impressionable, and they've been at it now for 7 more years, 5 more years. These people are seething, and they have perceptions of relative deprivation. You don't get to say that they don't have that. It's ridiculous that they might have that living in this society. But they do have it, and their in-group has an in-group narrative that supports that that's a righteous belief system to maintain. And we're going to destroy Hamas. And we're going to destroy the Proud Boys. And we're going to destroy Aryan nations. And we're going to destroy neo-Nazis. Maybe. Maybe we will and maybe we won't. But, what are we into this 4.5 months at this point? Hamas is still fighting. They're certainly not fighting like they were before, right? But 2/3 of the fighters, according to the IDF, are still alive. That's a problem because the global South is sick of other people dying too. Well, they need to just get over it, right? But they don't just get over it. Gaza is just a bit player. Nobody cares about Gaza. Geopolitically, right? We don't care about Gaza. I don't care about Gaza. I don't even care about the street up the way from me, right? I don't care about Gaza. This is a part of a larger conflict going on geopolitically. And Iran and Israel and Saudi Arabia are in this 3-way push-pull for dominance in the region. That's what this is about. And they're getting used by Iran. And the Houthis are getting used by Iran. And the Iraqi militias are getting used by Iran. They're happy to get used. right? They're happy to have the weapons. But we need to recognize that there's more going on than just the event that's causing the violence at that moment. These folks are a problem to us. And I want to argue for a second that maybe we've been a bit like Israel and making assumptions about our world standing. You've heard me say a couple of times so far that the global south wants to be heard. Well, this Japanese international relations specialist says this: Gaza will be the grave of the Western-led world order. There are people that perceive that the way we have led the world order, and we have, that maybe we haven't been as honest with third world countries and the global south about what we've been doing. And they want to vote. And BRICS wants to give them a vote. Not without strings attached, certainly. But they want to give them a vote. And there are 50 nations right now lined up to maybe change the way the world is ordered. I think we better start thinking about that. I've said in the past that sometimes America acts like a golden retriever running around the front room, knocking crap off the coffee table with their tail. We need to think about that because people are being strategic in their counter to our narrative. Brittle security environments are problematic, and they're problematic in the foreign realm, but also in the domestic realm. For instance, this is Arab Spring. This gentleman had been shook down by the cops enough, and he couldn't take it anymore, and he set himself on fire. Believe it or not, the guy lived. But he set the whole region off into what no one could have imagined because of a brittle security environment. And we have the same kind of brittle security environments that have cascading effects on our jurisdictions that we could not have imagined would take place. What is it that's coming this next year that we don't see? I know that the election is going to bring violence, but what is it that we don't see? Because there's something where we've created a brittle security environment that may lead to our downfall within our own organization or our organization's downfall. And you can see that people have gotten behind this in a way that they have not gotten behind an international movement in years. This has gone on for much longer than I thought it was going to go on initially. Even though it was very heavily monitored, and I would suggest that the Gaza-Israel border was much more heavily monitored than most of the things that we deal with. It went unseen, or at least unbelieved. And I think sometimes we don't believe that it could be something so bad, so catastrophic to our organization or our perspective on security. Hamas is always focused on Israel with their violence. The patron-client relationship, you saw it with Congress and senators, with the Houthis causing problems in the Gulf, and then with Hamas, and then with the Iraqi militias, and even with Hezbollah firing rockets. There were many that were calling, to hell with going after these little groups. Let's just strike Iran. Why? Because we recognize that they are the patron providing these arms. Well, these groups also recognize that we are the patron to Israel providing arms. I think that's a great thing. And also comes with some responsibility. And I suggest that we will start to see violence here in the same way that we saw it from Takfiri Salafi jihadists in the past. Right? You don't need to be a Salafi to bring violence to America. It's a different motivation, but it's one related to a patron-client relationship that we absolutely understand and we can prepare for. So, hey, what the hell does winning look like anyway? Is it just the number killed? Because I don't think that that's it. Normally Israel, when they mowed the grass, as they called it, or mowed the lawn, they killed 10 to 1. They would kill 10 Palestinians for every Israeli that was killed. It's more than that this time, by the way. But it makes me wonder, how do you determine what winning looks like in the midst of this? I want to argue that there's really only one front in the Gaza war. It doesn't have to do with Hezbollah, and it doesn't have to do with the Iraqi militias. It's about narrative warfare and dead children. That's the only front that's going to matter to the global South, and it's the only front that seems to matter to the EU, and it's picking up steam here in the United States. The narrative warfare is the war that actually is going to have a significant impact on what happens at the end of this conflict. The same is true here domestically. None of this is different just because it happens over there. Kinetic, shooting somebody. Kinetic attacks are super problematic, but I believe that the narrative attack has a greater impact at this point than single AR-15s or single bombs. These are socially constructed narratives by in-groups that don't hold the same view of how world order ought to work that you do. And we're in a real struggle right now, in a conflict right now globally, for whose dominant narrative has to be accepted. Henry Kissinger, he lived, 300 years old or something? He really set up the world to be a home court advantage for us. And that has shifted now. And we got to recognize that that's shifted, because that has responsibilities for us as a great power. Harvard poll, it says a share of Americans who think Hamas attack can be justified by grievances of the Palestinians. And it's by age, folks. So these very young people over here on your right, 65 and older, only 9% of them would agree with that. But look at the number of 18 to 24-year-olds. They do not have the same understanding of the world that you do. They do not have the same understanding. And that suggests that things are going to change. They're dynamic and amorphous. They're going to change. Because when we're wearing Depends, they're going to be making decisions about what happens in relation to these countries. This is from TikTok, so it's probably a lie. But hashtag stand with Israel, 324 million. Stand with Palestine, 3.4 billion. It's not even close, folks. I don't know who does this ticking talk thing, but it ain't me. Again, by age, we are aging out of the global understanding, the global order that we have all understood through our professional lives. We are aging out of that. And I want to say this. We have been impacted by narrative warfare before. We did not lose the Vietnam War. Oh yeah, we did. Because it was a narrative war. We won every single battle. Every pitched battle we won. And we lost the narrative war. Scott Galloway says that regimes that lose control of the narrative lose power soon after. You're not joking. These things that happen on camera, this thing that makes the cover of Time magazine, they have an impact that are not the same as killing these 5 or 10 people. They impact hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people to a narrative understanding of what needs to occur. Where's Dan O'Connor? Oh, he's in the back. I read this book because I read Dan O'Connor's review of this book. You need to read this book. I don't agree with all this book. I don't even agree with most of the things I write. But I don't agree with all of it. But we better change our mind on the way we understand our relationship to the world. Because we're screwing up by the numbers. Did you know that until Alaska and Hawaii were added, we were taking on new states for our history every 3 to 5 years? And then we just stopped. The world wants to move to America. For God's sakes, they're pouring apart across the borders. They want to move to America. And what do? No, you can't come here. We hate you. Not as much as I hate my brother-in-law, but I mean, I hate you, right? We have an advantage that Europe and Asia will never have. They have India, they have China, they got the EU, they got Russia, and they're all right there in the same blob. What do we have over here? We got us, and then we got us and Venezuela, who's sitting on our oil, for God's sakes. And I know, it was a joke. It's okay. It's just your normal joke. It's not going to hurt you. But what we do have here are people who are going to use the Gaza narratives for their own devices, for their own in-group understanding of what needs to go forward. This was on GW's library right after the attacks in October. Glory to our martyrs, divestment and Zionist genocide, divestment from Zionist genocide now, and free Palestine from the river to the sea. You know how there was probably 10 people that were involved and wanted to make this happen. You know what? That had a huge impact. It was in all the papers. It was on the local news. It made CNN and Fox. They had slightly different perspectives. A small group of people using technology for their own narrative outcome is happening right now. Wait until somebody like Angie knows how to use this frickin' AI, takes it and uses it to their own full ability. You know, these kids are going to put these things to use for their own narrative outcomes, not for ours. This threat is overwhelming, and I don't know what the hell you're supposed to do. There's about 10 dozen things that every jurisdiction and every leader in here needs to do. But all of it leads to us still hating each other and wondering, you know, how the peaceful transition of power will take place in November or January, and how good that's going to be to remain America. Well, Michael Brown in here? Yeah, Michael Brown, read his thesis. Michael Brown wrote a thesis on, I don't know. I can't remember the title. Sorry, Mike. What I take away from it is stand by. There's a proto-civil war coming, and we may be already involved in an incipient civil war. Barbara Walter, who I also don't agree with everything she says, because a bunch of it gets said from an ideological perspective rather than from an evidence perspective. But some of the things that she comes up with are frickin' genius. And I just want to make sure that we look at those. She's been a scholar on this topic she worked within CIA. I mean, she's a professor, but she does her research with a CIA group. They've found that there are 3 things that really are a telltale on what leads to, like, suggesting a civil war may come from that in that direction. It's anocracy, and that a former ruling class, former ruling class is losing status and power. and the presence of a militia. Hopefully you understand that we got the militias. We got that covered. The former ruling class, just in case you were wondering, those are white males, okay? They're used to ruling in this country, and that's changing. And then this anocracy issue. So in 2000, we used to be and I say used to be, we used to be the oldest continuous democracy. Used to be until 2000. And then we fell to anocracy. This place between democratic and autocratic rule. That has a lot to do with the not peaceful transfer of power in this country. This should scare us. This should move us to action. When I was a cop about 140 years ago, we used to talk all the time about how we were going to be proactive, except that we never were. We were reactive. Why? Because we knew how to react. We were not proactive. We have an opportunity to be proactive because we see the three things that matter to move towards civil war, and we see how they've impacted us, and we can do something about that. We better figure out what that something is, what those priorities are, and start to agree on them and move there as if it was a mission that had to be accomplished for the soul of our country. Why? Because it's a mission that has to be accomplished for the soul of your country. The agency says that there's pre-insurgency and there's incipient conflict. And once you get 1,000 dead in a 12-month period, then you got a genuine civil war. There's not going to be blue and gray people riding horses, waving sabers. Hell, there might be. You saw that dude in the Capitol with the Anders Strindberg hat on. We have an opportunity to do something as a group of professionals who are patriotic and care about where our country is going. If we don't take that challenge, shame on us. Because this Yahoo on the right is not going to do it. We are ripping apart this country with little dopamine hits from social media. This deal on your left is a movie that's coming out this year about the coming Civil War. Why? Because Hollywood figured out, we have a Civil War coming. We should make a movie about it. It'll be awesome. And they even break up the country into the way it's probably going to break up. Although I'm not buying that Nevada and Arizona and New Mexico are going with these folks in the East. I don't think they know them as well as I do. We are ripping apart the social fabric that every one of us has benefited from throughout our personal and professional lives. We need to change that. And we have some things we can do. We can recognize that we are here, damn it. We're still here, and we can do something about it because it's not too late. We got to consider that having a republic demands compromise and balance. Where does that start? It starts at the barbecue. It really does. You got to have more barbecues. You got to invite people from both sides, and you got to make the conversations incredibly difficult and complicated and not hateful, and invite them back after they hate you more the next time. Because that is something you can have a direct impact on your social group. I like this thing called social identity theory. And social identity theory says that when social groups hate each other, there's only one way around it. It's de, re, and cross-categorization. You have to decategorize the person you hate. You got to recategorize them as something you don't hate, or cross-categorize them something so that, what is it, Sunnyvale? Sunnyvale, California, right? Yeah, Sunnyvale, California has people that are firemen and cops in the same freaking department. They're leading the way on how to do this. This is what we have to do. We have to get to a Sunnyvale place of who we are within the country. You got to commit to civic nationalism. And civic nationalism is different than ethno-nationalism or religio-nationalism. I told you to start with, kill your dang television. It is not useful. Kill your television. Read serious material. Talk to your leadership cadre. Sit down with them and find out what they're reading. Suggest books to them that will help you grow as an organization and impact your decision making down the road. So that you're all on the same, operating from the same common picture. Mattis says, leaders today must read because they do not have time to fail through enough experiences. And you got to fail like son of a gun over and over and over again. But at some point we're running out of time to fail. So we need to read how other people have failed and maybe not do that this time. That would be a great idea. I don't want to be functionally illiterate. And I use Audible. Use whatever it is that makes you happy. What do you call those things? The Kindle. Yeah, I don't get involved in that. But whatever it is, find a way to read the great things that will have an impact on who we are as a nation. Why? Because we're counting on you to do it. It is all about the barbecue. Make it really messy. Get people with different perspectives and make it messy. And do it over and over again. First of all, barbecue is good for you. Don't bring tofu to my barbecue. There are bibliographies out there. I have them. Mattis has them. Good God, that man reads some interesting stuff. Get to those bibliographies. Greta Marlette will give you amazing bibliographies. This is an amazing human. Find a way to get to sources of information that are going to help you be a better leader, but also to help others make better decisions. I'm done.
Thank you.